The next part is Did You Know? And following the US administration asking all countries this week to follow the example of Malta, which did not allow 2 Russian planes to cross their airspace that was bound for aid for Venezuela, the official representative of the State Department, Morgan Ortagus, greatly appreciated the Maltese government's decision on April 4th, who refused without explanation permission to cross Maltese airspace of 2 aeroplanes carrying goods and passengers to Venezuela from Russia. Why? Well, let's have a look at Malta and who and what they are. Malta would, of course. Why? Because the whole island is owned by the Knights. The whole island. In 1530 is when the Knights chapter in Malta starts. Charles V of Spain, then a ruler of Malta, as well as the King of Sicily, nice connection there, mafia, gave the Knights the islands of Malta and Gozo, as well as the city of Tripoli, which is the present-day capital of Libya. Now, before becoming known as Knights of Malta, they were called the Knights Hospitaller and the Order of St. John, who received their own papal charter back in the 11th century. That has connections from Russia with love series. Now, the patron saint of it, Jean Baptiste, not John the Baptist. Jean Baptiste. Kind of fits the French connection, given Mary Magdalene fled to the Montsegur region of France. Now, St. John also has links to the Red Cross group. Yes, that group of psychopaths and money launderers and child traffickers who were established by 5 French people. Same group, same order, same house. And what you got to remember is back in 1100, the French in Europe were the dominant country back then. And it was them, you may remember, in a recent piece I did, that exposed them in 1215, who established the Magna Carta in the UK, which was for elite landowner benefits, not we the people. That's why Malta refused. Faction games. Here's a little coincidence of history. Did you know the construction of the pentagram, better known as the Pentagon, was started in 1941, which began on September the 11th. 50 years to the day, George Herbert Walker Bush, satanic psychopath, did his "When we are successful with the New World Order" speech. 10 years later, on the same day, was the Twin Towers, Joachim and Boaz. In relation to the People's Club business model that we put out, did you know the business model of a cooperative business has a survival rate of 80% compared to 44% and falling of the corporate model? Did you know Robert David Steele has apparently added 247 Twitter users as co-conspirators to his defamation case? Now, Robert David Steele, back on November the 8th, 2017 did a piece called hashtag Google Gestapo. Censorship and crowd stalking made easy. And the title of the piece was How the Deep State Controls Social Media and Digitally Assassinates Critics. Mr. Steele. The same Robert David Steele who stated publicly his claim to having once headed up a CIA false flag operation in South America. Oops. I wonder whether the people of South America should consider suing for an event that possibly killed people, although there is a disclaimer, as I currently don't have concrete proof of that. Repeat disclaimer. Surely they have a more valid reason for suing people, Mr. Steele, than someone who types a few words on the internet. Next item. Clowns are still putting it all in our face. This needs some serious attention, this piece. Via Sri Lanka. So that will allow for massive transfers of laundered money for the carnage that was caused there. And it also pulls at the heartstrings of people globally to pay into on what is a slush fund for the elites to keep going, and also float some banks who are struggling over there. And also the harvesting of funds off people, most notably called the Notre Dame fire. At that particular fire, a so-called dignitary just happened to be there at the exact same time, and also wearing a necklace that said the word burning on it. You can't make this shit up. But there's another more serious connotation of burning. That necklace worn by a black half-woman, half-man entity. There is an old term called necklacing, whereby a tire was forced around a black person's neck and set on fire. The burning necklace, eh, Mrs. Obama? Methinks you have some explaining to do. Now, sometimes the perpetrators of this crime went further and chopped off the victim's hands to stop them removing the tire. Surely Michelle Obama is aware of that heinous practice. But it was not done by white fascist KKK members in the deep south of America. Oh no. That practice, like the slavery trade, originated in Africa. Remember the Israeli piece in From Russia with Love, or I think it was in one of the shows, where it says we're going to make the whites believe that they've committed all the crimes against the blacks. This practice is what black South Africans did to their own people they considered to be traitors to their community. And Mrs. Obama's wearing a burning necklace. And yet again, I'm calling for the black communities to call these traitors to humanity out, just like Justin Smollett. Michael or Michelle is an utter disgrace to the people of your colour. and needs to be shunned out of your community altogether. Whether they thought it was fun to have burning while Notre Dame was on fire, she should have been aware of the racial connotations that entailed. Next item. Following the awful ordeal of Nasrat Jahan Rafi, who was doused with kerosene and set on fire at a school in Bangladesh, it's kind of time to highlight the plight of women in the Middle East, Asia and Southeast Asia, and also Africa for that matter, of the poor conditions and human rights that they have to endure. Now, according to women's rights groups in Bangladesh, there are 940 incidents of rape in Bangladesh in the past year. But researchers say the real number is likely to be much higher. As it said earlier, no one reports it, they're frightened. Now, the second-hand citizen level is improving in the Middle East and Asia, but in my opinion, not quick enough. Women told they can't drive must cover up on beaches and elsewhere even in the summer heat, whilst Ahmed walks around in shorts and flip-flops. Women having to walk yards behind their husbands. Women being stoned for reporting rapes for becoming unclean. Women must stay virgin before marriage, or again face being stoned or burnt to death. All very Vatican, Cult of Ra and Kali Ma, that to me. These practices are barbaric and archaic, and the days of hunter-gatherers dragging women around by the hair is long gone, chaps, and it's time to develop into a proper race and culture that values all as equals. And yes, I am aware of the dangers of the excess displayed by far too many women in the West, but there needs to be some balance here. Like the 21-year-old from Egypt mentioned earlier, who was jailed along with her producer for 2 years for singing in her underwear and eating a banana on a YouTube video. 2 years for doing a video, albeit one that may be distasteful to some, and yet Jeffrey Epstein rapes and abuses tens, if not hundreds of underage girls and gets 13 months jail. It's beyond comprehension. And it's time we had a proper global human rights organisation. Not some fake UN or other elite organisation which uses it as a vehicle to transfer kids from here, there and everywhere. A proper global human rights organisation that goes into these countries and imposes over the government basic human rights laws. Seeing as these communities appear to be incapable of it. Is that a bit fascist? Maybe. But it's the right type of fascism. Because if the people can't see that practice is beyond heinous, then they need to be told. Women are not second-class citizens, period. Sovereignty can't come quick enough, as that puts us all as equals. But it won't be the be-all and end-all without a change of mindset, and that is the greater goal. And all are responsible themselves for doing that. You don't need rules and laws to behave in a responsible manner. You only need laws and rules when you don't. And clearly, many of the males in these countries in Africa the Middle East and Asia and Southeast Asia just don't. Next item. Let's turn the spotlight on Mitt Romney. Now, everyone knows he's a bit of a rich guy, and is also prominent in the cult of Ra, known as Mormon. But what many people may not know, he scored great success, as the legend goes, as a, quote, turnaround specialist, unquote. A shrewd, now shrewd has a different connotation now than the original term for shrewd, which meant wicked, evil man. So we'll go with the former original version, because it kind of fits. A shrewd financial operator, Reed Snake Oil, who revived struggling companies as a high-priced consultant for a storied Wall Street private equity firm. But what most voters don't know is the way Romney actually made his fortune. And how he made his fortune was by borrowing vast sums of money that other people were forced to pay back. This is the plain, stark reality that has somehow eluded America's top political journalists for 2 consecutive presidential campaigns. They just ignored it. Romney is one of the greatest and most irresponsible debt creators of all time. And in the past few decades, in fact, Romney has piled more debt onto more unsuspecting companies, written more gigantic checks that other people have to cover than perhaps all but a handful of people on the planet Earth. Talking about debt this week as his focal point of his campaign is staggering hypocrisy at the highest levels by Romney. But then he, like many other politicians, have free rein to say what they like with no comebacks. Unless you happen to be named Donald Trump, and then it becomes a free-for-all. So Romney made $250 million fortune by loading up companies with debt and then extracting $1 million fees from those same companies in exchange for generous services of telling them who needs to be fired in order to finance the debt payments he saddled with them in the first place. Now, this was all done with a company called Bain Capital, which SEC documents proves he was still a part of it, whilst he went off making another money harvesting escapade known as the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake. And he is another of these rich elite family politicians who managed to sidestep military service. Go figure, like idiot Bush Jr. So this is what's known as venture capitalism, a business model that involved borrowing huge sums of money to take over existing firms, then extracting value from them by force. And this form of financial piracy came known as the leveraged buyout. And a private equity firm like Bain typically seeks out floundering businesses with good cash flows, and it then puts down a relatively small amount of its own money to then claim, and runs to the big banks like Goldman Sachs or the Citigroup or Wells Fargo for the rest of the financing. Now, most leveraged buyouts are financed with 60 to 90% borrowed cash. And the takeover firm then uses that borrowed money to buy a controlling stake in the target company, either with or without the company's consent. So when a leveraged buyout is done without the consent of the target, that then becomes a hostile takeover. Such lovely acts of corporate piracy, of course, were made legend back in the 80s. Romney and Bain avoided the hostile approach, preferring to secure the cooperation of their takeover targets by buying a company's management with lucrative bonuses. And once the management's on board, the rest is just math. So if the target company is worth 500 million, Bain and Romney might put 20 million down of its own cash, then borrow 350 million from an investment bank to take over the controlling stake. But there's a catch. Because when Bain borrows all that money from the bank, it's not Bain that pays it back. It's the target company that ends on the hook for all of the debt. So now your troubled firm is being taken over by a bunch of slick Wall Street dudes who kicked in as little as 5% as a down payment. And the company now owns the big bank, 350 million. Well, you all know what happens next. With all that new debt to service to pay, the company's bottom line now becomes untenable. And then these snakes like Romney tell the company, you have to start firing people immediately to get your costs down to a manageable level, and the takeover is complete because they moved their people in. And Romney has the audacity to question anyone else's ethics and business practices. He is the embodiment of where he came from and the church he represents. Seedy, snake oil, fake and corrupt. Add in child molestation and your set is complete, Mr. Romney. We'll have more of you if you keep piping up your pie hole. The media's attempts, and there's been 3 different groups to date. These next 2 pieces are kind of linked with the From Russia with Love series, surprisingly. To blame terrorist organisations for the Sri Lanka bombings, which was far too sophisticated and organised for a ragtag army. This was agency level planning, in my opinion. Now, the name thrown up was a new one to me, so I did some research on them, and something real interesting popped up for those that remember the From Russia with Love series. The Baloch was the first one thrown up. Is a Muslim community founded in the state of Uttar Pradesh in India. They are descended from the Baloch tribesmen, so they've changed from Baluk to Baloch, who settled in this region of North India in the late Middle Ages. The community there used the surname Khan. Oh my. And they're often known as Khan Baloch. And the 3 Baloch adventurers, Ismail Khan, Fateh Khan and Ghazi Khan, founded the 3 Diharas encampments that bear their name, and established themselves as an independent rulers of the lower Gujarat and Muzaffargarh. Hope I've said that right. Which they and their descendants have held for nearly 300 years. Now, the three brothers founded the settlements of Ghazi Khan, Dera Ismail Khan and Daya Khan, nice use of that word, and the three southern Balokis gradually spread into the valleys of the Indus, Chenab and Sutlej regions. In 1555, a large body of Balokis under their great leader Mir Shakar accompanied the Emperor Humayun into India, and these Balok are descendants of mercenaries that were brought to this region by the Nawabs of Awad. So who are they? Nawabs of Awad were descendants from which place? Nishapur, Iran, which was ransacked by Genghis Khan. All fits in there. A further look into the how their society runs will give further clues. They marry with other Muslim communities, and some members are endogamous, which is the practice of marrying within a specific social group, caste or ethnic group, rejecting those from others as unsuitable for marriage or other close personal relationships. They practice marrying within close kin, unlike other North Indian Muslim communities. The Balok practice both cross-cousin and parallel cousin marriages also. All very Kalimar, Khazarian, cult of Ra, that to me. So why this region? Based on ancient principles, when you hear this narrative of how that island was built up and on whose principles, perhaps it makes a little bit more sense. Now, Anagarika Dharmapala was one of the leading contributors to the Buddhist revival of the 19th century, taking up previous efforts done in that region that led to the creation of what is now called Buddhist institutions and Buddhist schools to match those of the Christian missionaries, and to the independence movement of the 20th century. Now, he illustrated the first 3 points in a public speech. Quote, "This bright, beautiful island was made into a paradise by Aryan Sinhalese." That's why it was destroyed. Before its destruction was brought about by the barbaric Vandals, its people did not know non-religion. Christianity and polytheism are responsible for the vulgar practices of killing animals, stealing, prostitution, licentiousness, lying and drunkenness. The ancient, historic, refined people under the diabolism of vicious paganism introduced by the British administrators are now declining slowly away. That tells you a lot. Why would they keep the name of Khan 800 years after out of Nishapur, Iran, and attack Sri Lanka that was created into a paradise by the Aryan people? Here's a new word given in the Talmud they deny the spirit world, and yes, there is precedence in Hebrew. The word shedim, S-H-E-D-I-M, are spirits or demons in early Jewish mythology. However, they are not necessarily equivalent to the modern connotation of demons as evil entities. I wouldn't go that far. Evil spirits were thought as the cause of maladies back then, and conceptual, different from the shedim, who are not evil demigods but the foreign gods themselves. That should give you a pointer who they are. Shedim are just evil in the sense that they are not God. They only appear twice in Tanakh, at Psalm 106:37 and Deuteronomy 32:17. And it states it deals with child or animal sacrifices. The demon spirits, the shedim. Although the word is traditionally derived from the root swd, Hebrew shud, that conveys the meaning of acting with violence or laying waste, and it was possibly a loan word from the Akkadian, in which the word shedu referred to a protective, benevolent spirit. Now the word may also derive from sedim, and as Assyrian god, spelt G-U-A-R-D, not G-O-D, as reference according to law. Azazel slept with Nama and spawned Assyrian god spirits known as Sedem. Azazel was not good. Him and Ra, or it and Ra, Azrael, remember. And with the translation of Hebrew text into Greek under the influence of Zoroastrian dualism, Shedim were translated into daemonia, demon, with implicit negativity. Now later in the Judeo-Islamic culture, Shedim became the Hebrew word for the real name for spirits, jinn. And according to one legend, the Shedim are descendants of serpents. Oh my. Or of demons in the form of serpents, which is alluding to the serpent in the Garden of Eden as related in the Genesis book. Now to others, they are descendants of Adam and Lilith, not Eve, Lilith. Another legend said that God had started making them, intending for them to be humans, but did not complete their creation because he was resting during the Sabbath. Really? Like a creator has to rest. Oh dear. Even after the Sabbath, he left them how they were to show that when the Sabbath comes, all work must be viewed as complete. And the Shedim are said to have had feet and claws of a rooster, and shares some characteristics of both humans and angels. Like angels, they know the future and have wings. Not all angels are what you think, and neither are all demons. They're actually one and the same. But they like humans, they eat, drink and procreate and die. They can also cause sickness and misfortune. That's some of the ones that were bound by Solomon, are involved in various types of social interference. They all have roles. One will interfere with a marriage, one will cause a death in the family, one will cause sickness, and they all have different roles and cause carnage. Now, again, links to From Russia with Love, and this: supposedly sinful people sacrificed their daughters to the Shedim. Again, this is all very Solomon. remember the piece we did about the women sacrificing their kids, and there was all kinds of loud noise in the background so people wouldn't hear the wailing, and the women weren't even allowed to shed a tear, otherwise they would have got sacrificed as well. But it's unclear if the sacrifice consisted in the murdering of the victims or in the sexual satisfaction of the demons. So, to see if the Shedim were present in some places, ashes were thrown to the ground or the floor, and then their footsteps would become visible. The Shedim are supposed to follow the dead or fly around the graves, and there are many things that one is admonished to not to do in order to avoid evoking Shedim, such as whistling or even saying the word Shedim. That's the spirits. I hope that was enlightening. Serpents. Final piece before a music break. A conversation piece came up in response to a guest that Alan from OYM had on Circle of White Light, his new show this week, which I will be on Sunday. And it was a yoga expert, and from all accounts she's a fairly good one. But a question was raised on the subject about shielding before participating in that practice. And predictably, with any expert on any subject, if that information is not in their field, they kind of go defensive on it, like it's their fault for not knowing. This is a common theme for some in the alt media. They react badly to the information, and yet, why is it a reflection of them or you? If you don't know things, you don't know. It's no big deal. There's lots of things we all don't know. It's not a reflection. Nobody can possibly know everything on a single subject. The system makes sure of that. So let's try and be less harsh on ourselves for not knowing things. Now, the issue with yoga is it involves pulling in energy streams from the field all around us. The great unseen energy. We can't see it, smell, hear or touch it. But with frequencies heightened, you can sense and eventually feel the field. It is a force, which is a compressed version of the energy around you. Now, yoga opens up the portals. If you haven't shielded, you're allowing the likes of the Shedim in. It's another way of being possessed. And far from poo-pooing it and ignoring it, it would be far better if people threw a shielding piece in when they're teaching people how to do yoga. Because if you're not aware of it, you're putting every person who does that practice in grave danger.